Alright, everybody. Unfortunately, we're starting off tonight's stream with a little bit of a depressing topic. There's nothing more American at this point than school shootings. We have a very strong gun culture in America. There are a lot more guns in America than there are people, in fact. And while I'm honestly a fan of gun ownership, generally speaking, like, I currently don't own guns, but I plan to own quite a few when I'm in the position that it is responsible to own them, because right now my moving situation is a little bit like it's just I don't want to own guns while I'm actively moving, you know. It just seems irresponsible, but I'm very much in favor of gun ownership. I love shooting guns. I love, you know, the idea of there being an armed working class. I particularly love the idea of arming, you know, like marginalized groups against potential oppression from the state. However, one of the biggest downsides of mass gun ownership in our country has been very high deaths by gun, you know, statistics, right? Now, while most gun deaths here in America are suicides or self-inflicted gun deaths of some kind, right? Like whether it be suicide or like accidental, you know, gun misfire situations, most gun deaths are not like mass shootings, for example. However, America has been, you know, become quite known for its mass shootings, since the amount of gun availability in this country just means that you're more likely to see a shooting occur in which someone is using a gun that is particularly useful for a mass shooting, you know, as opposed to many other countries where their gun restrictions can make acquiring the ammo, the magazines, or just the guns themselves a lot more difficult. Regardless, there are also a lot of loopholes here in America to make, even in states where certain guns are banned, like, say, for example, if automatic fire or semi-automatic fire is banned, there are a lot of loopholes, certain attachments you can use to simulate it, which effectively creates that, you know, for all intents and purposes. It's not the same, but, you know, regardless, gun ownership and mass gun ownership in our country, particularly considering a lot of the problems socially our country is facing, has led to a lot of mass shootings. And while they're not a statistically large part of gun violence in this country, or even gun deaths in this country, they're still a very big problem. It's scary that at this point we've got, I believe there was a very famous image that was being passed around on Twitter, schools using school shooting safe rooms. Like, there's these classrooms that have these, like, unfolding safe rooms. Yeah, holy shit, I didn't even see this one. There's a few of them. So, like, they unfold. So, like, if there's a school shooting, they, like, all the students can, and the teachers can get in here and wait for police to arrive and take care of the problem, ideally. A lot of kids in America are terrified, and a lot of parents, rightfully so, are outraged. Though the NRA, as well as many other, like, dark conservative, you know, dark money groups, have put a lot of money into ensuring that gun ownership continues to be a staple of American culture, but not in the same way that, like, a leftist who's in favor of arming the working class would be. The NRA and a lot of these other, you know, conservative gun associations, they want to make guns sort of a lifestyle in a way that's very toxic. They also not monopolize, they, what's the word for it? They, commodify guns in a very weird way, right? Like I wish I could get away with showing you, is there copyright on the NRA commercials? I can't put into words the issues that the NRA, the issues that I have with the NRA. They sponsor a lot of bills and whatnot that are pretty fucked up. They fetishize guns quite a bit. Anyway, the NRA is a very right-wing organization. Most of the things that they push money for to ensure Republican candidates, like, win their elections and whatnot, and they put out some very cringy ads. They want to turn gun ownership into a lifestyle. You'll see it. They, like, something they did recently was try to encourage more female gun ownership by, like, trying to push like pink camos and pink holsters for conceal carrying and open carrying, and like it's just, I don't know, it's just all very weird. It feels like we're going from guns being a very serious, not a toy, but a tool that is, you know, is made for killing people or killing killing things, generally speaking, but usually people. Like, these aren't a toy. And I feel like the way that the NRA and a lot of conservative culture has, you know, built around guns has been treating them like toys. Like toys for grown-ups. Would you guys agree with that? Does that make sense? Regardless, there's been another school shooting. And you would expect that the right would be immediately jumping on board with their normal, you know, the normal line that they toe when there's a school shooting, right? Defending gun ownership and finding a way to, like, deflect blame, right? Like, that's what they generally do. But something's different this time. For the first time, as far as I'm aware, this school shooter was trans. The right's mouths started watering the second they found out about this. And we'll get a little bit more into the implications of this story and how the right has been propagandizing it and how successfully they've been doing so. But let's start by reading this article from NPR. What we know about the deadly shooting at a Nashville elementary school. Nashville, Tennessee authorities on Tuesday released graphic body camera footage showing the fatal confrontation between police and an armed assailant who attacked a grade school on Monday morning. I watched this footage, by the way. It's pretty horrifying, but yeah, I've seen it. 6 people, including 3 children, were killed in the shooting, and the suspected attacker was killed by police within minutes of the first call of an active shooter. Hail. I'm pretty sure this is misgender or like dead naming. I'm pretty certain this is dead naming. Now, I think this is the first point, like, where we're gonna, like... this is the first point where we're gonna stop and have a discussion here, okay? We're in sort of this area when it comes to trans acceptance, broadly speaking, where there's a lot of people that are accepting of trans people that they like, right? But for people they don't like, or that don't meet their moral standards, or even just outright terrible people who are trans, they will not affirm, because they genuinely feel like affirming a trans person's identity is a favor they're doing like a delusional person to make them feel better, not like an actual, like, not them changing their language in order to more accurately represent the identity of somebody they're speaking with or talking about. I feel that's how a lot of, like, trans-accepting people in, like, the normie sphere actually are, which is why in situations where a trans person has committed a crime, you'll see a lot of them start to question whether or not, you know, validating their identity or misgendering them is wrong or whatever, right? So here's what I'm going to say. This is my opinion on this, okay? I believe that it is as wrong to misgender or dead name a trans person who is a mass shooter as it is to say, like, refer to a black school shooter by the N-word. When you do these things, even though they may seem like targeted, insults or targeted, like, rudeness, you are still just being transphobic, or in the other case, you would still just be being racist, right? The only reason why you would want to do those things in either case would, in one case, because you're racist, or in the other case, because you're transphobic. You're just looking for a reason to morally justify transphobia or racism towards an individual. And it's like, oh, okay, so this person has done something so morally wrong that now we can just be transphobic towards them. Now we can just be racist towards them. Obviously, you can't do that, in the case of race, but with trans people, we're not quite at the level of cultural acceptance, I think, where people are going to stop and say, wait, what the you can't just say that just because they did that. Whoa, that strays, you're a lot of people are catching strays by you saying that, right? Anyway, dead name, whom police... Also, Cherry, just go ahead and edit out the dead name in the video. Listen, I'm going to be completely honest. I don't care that this dumb motherfucker, this piece of shit, murdered a bunch of people, okay? Like, I'm not going to dead name, you know? It's just, it's for the same reason I would not call a black school shooter the N-word. Same reason. You're firing off like a shotgun blast when you do that. That's hitting a lot more people than the literal school shooter, right? Deadname, whom police identified as the shooter, had bought several firearms, including the 3 guns used in the attack, legally, and had been in treatment for an emotional disorder. Nashville Police Chief John Drake said Tuesday. Very interesting, this person was able to legally buy firearms while going through treatment for an emotional disorder. Granted, I do think it's kind of a problem to narrow down, like, gun ownership based on, like, mental state, because then the state itself, like, the government can start to say who can and can't own guns, and that's a little scary, but, like, come on. That's a little bit concerning that happened, you know? His name was Aiden? Okay. Yeah, regardless, though, this dude was a piece of shit. This guy was an absolute piece of shit. And not only was he a piece of shit for murdering a bunch of children, like, putting aside the fact that he literally massacred children in a school, right? He's also a piece of shit because his actions, like, inadvertently may fuel transphobic rhetoric and propaganda for months or years to come. I literally have been seeing the It's Ma'am GameStop video over and over again on Twitter for the last few days, and that's literally from like years and years and years ago. That's like an old meme, and the right's bringing that back up again. You're seeing it everywhere again. Like, the right will continue to use this for years. And you know what the sad thing is? None of it's fair. It's not fair. I'm sorry, I can't say anything to make it better. It's just not fair. Breonna J was murdered, and a lot of right-wingers online absolutely rallied behind it. They celebrated it. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to him, and they celebrated it, and they were making jokes about it and just laughing about the death of a child because she was trans. In this case, a trans mass shooter has given them an excuse to levy even more hatred and vitriolic genocidal rhetoric at the trans community, but to also look morally justified, and not only morally justified, but morally virtuous in doing so. Right-wingers are going to look like heroes for the genocidal rhetoric they're going to make using this shooting. So on top of murdering children, this piece of shit also enabled all of the horrible things the right is going to do following this event. Fuck this scumbag piece of shit. Also, apparently there is a manifesto. Apparently the shooter has a manifesto. It hasn't been found yet as far as I'm aware, but I really want to see it. And something that's happened on Twitter is a bunch of people, like, I'm just gonna outright say it. One of the biggest people pushing this is Para-Globalism, the dude who cheated on Soak Darling. That asshole. He's claiming that there's like a 10% chance the shooter was a Vosh fan, and they're trying to claim that Vosh and like the breadtube sphere encouraged and caused this shooting through stochastic terrorism by claiming the right are trying to genocide trans people. Libs on Twitter, neo-libs are trying to claim that breadtubers caused this shooting by saying that the right is trying to genocide trans people. Sansol was doing that too. Yeah, it's all the biggest pieces of shit doing it. Like it's all people who already have a really bad reputation for just being bad people, which shouldn't surprise you, but I'm just letting you guys know, you know? The shooting occurred at the Covenant School, a private elementary school on the grounds of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Nashville's Green Hills neighborhood. Our community is heartbroken, the school said in a statement on Monday. We are grieving tremendous loss and are in shock coming out of the terror that shattered our school and church. The massacre drew messages. Oh yeah, and it was a Christian school as well. It was like a Christian school. So the right was able to victimize themselves even more with this. The massacre drew the messages of sympathy from politicians, including President Biden and others across the U.S., and it reignited calls for Congress to do more to prevent school shootings. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 130 mass shootings in the U.S. so far this year. Damn, 3 months in and 130 mass shootings. America number one. Here's what we know about the mass shooting and who died. How the shooting unfolded. Authorities say they received the first call of an active shooter at the Covenant School at 10:13 a.m. local time. The shooter, a 28-year-old from the Nashville area, was a former student of the school. Authorities initially identified the shooter as a misgender, but later clarified that Hale used he/him pronouns. Why would they misgender in the article then? Oh god, the mainstream media is fucked. Mainstream media is fucked when it comes to their coverage of anything trans. Like they literally they'll dead name a trans mass shooter and they'll dead name the trans victim of a hate crime. Like it's just like they'll take the immediate name like found on the ID because they want to get a story out immediately for clickbait reasons. So like if identification immediately on the scene is made by like police, they'll immediately like post that, you know, those pronouns, that gender, and that name. And that's what will go around the first wave of news because everybody wants to get their article out first. Local police arrived at the school within minutes of the first 911 call. Muffled gunshots can be heard in the background, and Engelbert and the other officers rush upstairs to the second floor. Gunshots grow louder. Engelbert. Yes, they're describing the shoulder cam footage right now. I don't think it's necessary for me to describe the shooting in detail, but the victims were Evelyn Dykehouse, aged 9, who was a 3rd grader at the Covenant School, and her sister was a 5th grader, according to the Tennessean. At a vigil, Evelyn's sister cried as she said, "I don't want to be an only child." Haley Scruggs, age 9, another 9-year-old, was the daughter of Chad Scruggs, the senior pastor at Covenant Presbyterian Church, according to CBS News. William Kinney, age 9. Nothing said about William. Cynthia Peake, age 61, was a substitute teacher, according to authorities. Tennessee's Governor Bill Lee said Peake was a close friend of his wife, Maria. Catherine Kunch, age 60, is identified in the school's website as the head of the Covenant School. Governor Lee said Kunch was also a family friend. Mike Hill, age 61, worked as a janitor at the school, police said. "We pray for the Covenant School and are so grateful that Michael was beloved by the faculty. So grateful that Michael was beloved by the faculty and students who filled him with joy for 14 years. His family said in a statement, according to the Associated Press, he was a father of 7 children and 14 grandchildren. He liked to cook and spend time with his family." Police say they don't yet have a motive for the shooting. Investigators were reviewing writings by Hale, who had attended the Covenant School and had interviewed the suspect's parents. Drake said during a Tuesday press briefing that the shooter had legally purchased 7 firearms from 5 local gun dealers. 3 of those weapons were used in Monday's attack. According to Drake, Hale's parents thought their child shouldn't own any weapons and believed Hale had sold the only gun that Hale owned. Why don't they just say he? Why don't they just use pronouns instead of like the last name? Like it's not that hard. Like right like they're it's easier. That's what they're there for. Pronouns are there to make sentences flow better when speaking about somebody. They also told police that Hale was under a doctor's care for an emotional disorder. Yeah, once again, like, come on, America. The shooter apparently also had detailed maps drawn of the school that identified entry points. Jesus Christ. Well, as you can tell, the fact that the shooter is trans led to a very obvious response. Now, if you're somebody who has seen or just heard about this shooting just from like the media coverage of it on the right, something you might realize is you actually might not have known what gender identity the shooter had. The shooter was in fact a trans man. But you see, trans men are not typically like the target of right-wing propaganda. You see, they're not that scary. Right? Like, the idea of a male dressing up as a woman and invading women's spaces and forcing us to call him a woman. Like, that's so much more scary than, you know, trans dudes or anything you could really even try to make trans dudes into, because even transphobes that don't see trans men as men would see them as women, and thus inherently less, like, imposing and scary. That's just typically how it goes with a lot of transphobes, right? Which is why you might have noticed a lot of these right-wing, political pundits have been very vague when speaking about this as to the gender identity of the shooter. They say the shooter is trans, but they never say the shooter is a trans man. In fact, they almost imply that the shooter is a trans woman in a lot of their posts, because that is kind of, like, more beneficial for their propaganda. Anyway, things have been going kind of crazy. For starters, Matt Walsh, the sort of, I guess you could call it, leader of the trans genocide movement right now, has tweeted this just a few hours ago. I came to the conclusion years ago that the trans movement is the greatest evil our country faces. I only become more and more sure of this fact with each passing day, and more determined to oppose it until my last breath. So that's just Matt Walsh casually saying that trans people and their existence is the biggest evil that this country faces, and he'll fight until his last breath to destroy it. I'm sure there's nothing worrying there to look into there. This is trans privilege in a nutshell. Even when they massacre children, they're still the victim. Here's him calling for Michael Knowles to be unbanned. Here, I'm finding his tweets about this because they're all very genocidal and insane. Misgendering the shooter randomly for no reason other than just to be transphobic for no reason. Someone tweeted, ask Matt Walsh about the event I was organizing in my city with local pro-life orgs that he and Live Action came in and stole from us, while giving zero credit to myself, the org I was working for, or any of the other lesser-known orgs I had reached out to for a speaker lineup. He quote tweets it saying, oh, of course, it always comes back to this. You're angry you didn't get credit for something. We held a massive pro-life rally and you're still bitter years later because it was stolen from you. I'm not sure how a rally can be stolen, but I do know this makes you look incredibly petty and selfish. Matt Walsh is like a massive asshole to even like other people on the right. This is why the massive falling out happened with Steven Crowder when he outed the $50 million contract Daily Wire offered him to toe their line. Oh my god. This is not the only person, by the way, who's doing the insane, like, trans-genocidal rhetoric, by the way. Like, all the right-wingers are doing it, okay? If you go on Twitter and you scroll for a bit, you're gonna see it. They're all doing it. Look at the For You page on Twitter. You're gonna see it. I believe Tucker Carlson has also, of course, predictably jumped on board with this, the trans people are a danger thing. If I recall correctly, let me see. I need to bring up Soaked on Left's. Yeah, here's one of the posts that went viral. The Colorado Springs shooter identified as non-binary. The Denver shooter identified as trans. I believe most of these statements he's making here in this tweet are completely false, by the way. I'm pretty sure this person is just openly lying. The Aberdeen shooter identified as trans. The Nashville shooter identified as trans. One thing is very clear. The modern trans movement is radicalizing activists into terrorists. 104,000 likes. That's 104,000 people that want you dead. And then you got STL replying, your claim the trans movement is radicalizing activists is completely absurd. Of 2,829 mass shootings, those with 4 or more victims, 3 were conducted by trans people. That's 0.11%, which is, I mean, obvious. I would have honestly thought it'd be a little higher, but, still predictably very low statistic. And this is, of course, per capita, still very low. And honestly, considering the, like, socio-political conditions that trans youth go through, like, when you think about the things that typically lead a kid to do a school shooting, and when you think about the things that trans kids have to go through, it's, like, surprising there aren't more trans kids doing mass shootings. Like, I don't know. I guess trans people are just built different. They just have higher resistance to that shit. Anyway, expect to see very demonic Republican propaganda coming out of this. The right is going to weaponize this in ways that I don't think many of you have ever seen before. And you're probably going to see potentially violence against trans people in the streets in response to this, because the right is going to feel more empowered than ever, feeling as though they're fighting to defend children from literal mass shootings. So Expect to see violence escalate. That's really the only logical next step from what's happened here. Fuck this piece of shit shooter. He's an absolute scum-fucking piece of shit, and I'm glad he's rotting dead in the ground. Really not much else to say on it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribe, comment down below. There are other ways to support me, linked down below in the description. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.